Okay, I wanted to give, that's Marc Seitz and Nathan Faith. I had mentioned their names earlier. Do you guys want to say anything to begin with, or?
Yeah, I guess I can open it up.
You can just hit the thing.
I think it's on. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I think that the two presentations that led up to this were fantastic. I think that the focus on information sharing and knowing your process through your people's perspective and implementing technology is certainly important. I was especially excited to participate on this panel because I've been in the manufacturing environment, and I can say that it is a critical infrastructure. I don't think that Mandy portrayed it as that, but it's certainly what makes our world, and most importantly our United States, function as well as we do, with that being a focus. And critical infrastructure protection is my passion. So as mentioned, I'm in the energy sector, nuclear sector specifically, but it's the same equipment when you boil it down with automation, and it's the same equipment if it's IT or OT as far as how we look at providing or implementing security solutions. And with Marc to my right here, the focus on information sharing, he stated it quite plainly. There's no need to know unless it's nuclear, right? Unfortunately, we do share very well amongst ourselves, but because of the nature and sensitivity of nuclear security and what's required by the federal government, we can't always relay everything because of nuclear sensitivity. However, with that being said, I wanted to point out really quickly that information sharing within your sector, whatever it is, or your industry, utility, I would say definitely get engaged, get involved. There's U.S. government resources that are freely available, even to non-U.S. citizens or countries. Marc mentioned the national labs. There's great efforts being done by national labs to support national homeland security, but also the private industry. With that comes the electric sharing and information analysis center. So there's an ISAC, an ISAO. There are conduits that you can get engaged in to share that information and to get the right information to the right people. And I don't want to minimize the value of sharing even, I think maybe, or I'm seeing this, because when it goes to the right people and enough people are talking to the right people, it could quite quickly become an indicator of compromise. And if you have an IOC that is an active campaign by a nation state and or a competitor, someone in another country that's just looking to gain competitive advantage, espionage, the bottom line is you're protecting your business, you're looking out for the interests and assets of others. And I think it does take that IT, OT, the we approach that was conveyed. So I got some other points, but I just wanted to open up and compliment the two presenters prior and just touch on some of their facets because I think they're very important. Thank you.
Yeah. So here's your sales pitch. Here's what you've been waiting for. No, just kidding. One of the things Dragos prides itself on is really trying to be really involved with the community and making sure that we're talking more about how we are solving the problem rather than talking, in general about the problem or what the problems are. Maybe certainly commending both Mandy and Marc talking about how they are solving the problem, things that they're seeing in retrospective from a year ago, how they're investing in their own people and their process and using technology as a way to continue to drive their own organizations forward rather than thinking that technology is going to be in there, it's more blinking lights, and that's just going to get the job done. One of the things that I talked with Marc a lot about at this conference so far is how does SRP continue to move things forward? What narrative are they telling their leadership to make these things happen? That's oftentimes what we see from a little bit of the professional services side of Dragos is analysts and organizations that are getting stuck. They're not getting the resources and the funding that they need despite, at their level seeing the problems and saying, we care about Russia. But what are the facts, right? We need to get beyond the facts into here's the narrative, here's the why it matters. And I think that both these presentations really help frame those sort of facts into here's where we need to go. Here are the people that we need, the processes that we need, and ultimately how do technologies help us do that? So not going to spend any more time than that. Really interested to hear the discussion and hear more from our panelists here.
Okay, I have several questions, but we always give the attendees first shot, that's for sure. Any questions? Oh, there's one way over there, Larry.
Marc, Mark. I really enjoyed your presentation. Enjoyed all of the presentations, but I came in late, so I didn't see every single one of them. But when we're talking about critical infrastructures, one of the things that I've recognized is that critical infrastructures have interdependencies between all of the different critical infrastructures as defined within PDP 21 of the presidential directive. And you know, I wrote down sharing is caring, because that's the theme that I would use within the presentations. Do you see your solutions expanding beyond just the scope of the electrical industry, or will it be going into all of the interdependence of the different critical infrastructures and sharing to those other critical infrastructures that you're interconnected with?
And are you directing it to anybody? Yeah.
Yeah,
Look.
is my mic on? Or do I need to hold this one?
Yeah,
I'll
you
hold
can
this
share
one.
mine.
So yeah, I absolutely think it needs to move to all industries. It's there is a cycle, and I referenced Sandworm. The last chapter in Sandworm, there's an interview in there where Andy Greenberg interviews, I can't remember the name of the person he interviewed, but he described the interrelations as being one of the significant risks we face. He called it greater than global warming, which in today's climate debate is a pretty big thing to say, right? He basically posited that the interrelations and the cascading failures that we could have as a result of these interrelations is probably the most significant risk that we face together as a civilization. So when you start looking at your question and the interdependencies we have, we absolutely need to be able to go across sector. Now, the nuclear, I think, is a really good one. We don't need to describe to me how another industry protects their nuclear radiological material. I don't need to know that, right? But I can learn a lot from them, and already have, without knowing some of the details. I've taken some of the best practices out of nuclear and applied it to coal and gas and water and some of the other things. Just by, it's the same, and it applies to manufacturing as well. There are things that we can learn from each other, and as we get better at sharing, I think we're going to learn more and learn how to implement those things better and faster.
Yeah, I'd like to compliment that. I think that knowing the attribution of some particular threat is really not important. It's important to know if you have that same vulnerability and risk. And that's based on what was the technique, what was the attack vector, and do you have that same or similar equipment. So reporting it through any one of the channels is one of the best venues in a vehicle to get that information to those other sectors. Because the ISACs have an Information Sharing Analysis Center, there's a multi-state ISAC, there's a National Council of ISACs. All of those ISACs will share that information of a potential cyber attack or a known cyber attack amongst themselves. And also, if you're using a trusted vendor through a non-disclosure agreement process and they're supporting you on any of these incidents, the vendor community is also very good about sharing information when it comes to firm and positive information. They're not going to share what they might think is in process or in development without factual information. But you've seen it in the case of the Hatman, the Trisis Trident, Triconics vulnerability and active exploit. That was shared amongst the top lending threat hunters, Dragos and Mandy at FireEye, and it was a very good success story that was able to cascade out to multiple consumers of those open source or vendor provided threat intel services, but also back through the U.S. government and the CISA, the DHS organization, through the national labs was able to help dissect that and get that information out there that says, yes, not only do these vendors understand that there is this in the wild, but it affects all of these sectors, and this is the specific equipment, and this is serious. It's about safety instrument systems. So Mandy talked about knowing your what you have in your configuration management database. So the onus is on you. Know what you have, but also know what's inside what you have. Intel is one of the sponsors here, and everything has Intel inside, or at least some microprocessor. But now it's to the point where unfortunately, maybe the attacker's inside already through the supply chain. So knowing what's on your floor and what's connected to your network is absolutely imperative.
And I want to add one last thing. So we're talking a lot about national agencies, ISACs, things like that, right? We have enough technology, collaboration technology today. It's a really positive feeling when you see something about Blue Keep come out and I get 5 invites from my local businesses, right? Like my CISO roundtable and my, you know, Rockwell sits an hour away from me and Johnsonville. And, you know, we've got all of these different people in our industry that have the same exact problems that I'm having. And so we don't even always have to wait for a national approach or an ISAC approach. We get on a phone call together and we just say, you know, I'm seeing this in my enterprise or I'm seeing this on the floor. You know, this isn't part of my scheduled downtime on the floor. How are we going to address this? How are we going to mitigate it? And we hear from others. So sharing is caring. And you know, I would say crowdsource it, right? I mean, put it on LinkedIn, you know, put it, even if you're anonymizing it or abstracting it, right? If you get the word out, there are so many forums and places that it's almost overwhelming how much information you can get, but getting that trusted circle of people that have a similar experience as you and having a very open conversation with them can help as well. So take it from both sides and find your middle.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah, just one last quick thing there is I don't think critical infrastructure is as siloed as we all make it out to be. The first time walk into a steel manufacturing facility where their focus is just on the temper mill, the pickling line, the hot strip mill, you know, all of those manufacturing processes. When we looked at their facility, they have 3 water treatment facilities moving water into the facility, right, connected by the same control system. And they also have 2 substations, right, to get enough power to be able to actually, you know, make that process work. And you know, from the electric side, the insights that we're going to get on Neighborhood Keeper, it absolutely is going to matter to that steel manufacturer because they have substations, they have the same equipment, the same devices that they're going to need to be able to protect as well. So I think the more direct use case in my mind is that it's going to be more of a force when people realize that just because you're in advanced manufacturing doesn't mean you aren't using the components that other critical infrastructure pieces are using as well.
I'm going to take the liberty of asking of just follow-up. Stop me when I take too much time, Mark. No, but it was a point that Mark made in your presentation that I just want to clarify, because, not clarify, but raise. You know, the thing with Stanley McChrystal of networking. Now, there's a difference to me between networking and information sharing. I think the ideal is probably networking. And use Nathan as an example, how when you were talking, oh, he knows all these people. One thing is to focus on, I understand if you're limited, you can't do that, but it seems to me the real ideal is to just network and get to know so many people that you can freely call them up and say, hey, Nathan, I know you got some stuff you can't tell me, but you know, I've got this one little thing here, you know, do you have anything like that, or do you know anything about it? And then he leads you. I would think networking, even, you know, where a lot of the focus I hear lately on the information sharing, I think is wonderful, of course, but it's more, how do we automate the information sharing and make all that when we're kind of neglecting this whole issue of saying, no, what we really want is networking.
Step 1 is to build trust. You build
Yes,
the
it comes
trust
back to that
by
issue.
starting the network. So it's the same thing that manages, when you have that network, you start with the trust, and then your willingness to share and to be direct about the problems and solutions, it builds from developing that trust in the network, and then the information starts to flow.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think the goal in the end is the networking.
The network is absolutely important. I call it the good old boy network, and it works, but I don't want to portray it as something that should work the way it does. I think that having the information sharing with an established protocol as a duty to share is absolutely the necessary way to do it. But if you're not sure, if you have that duty to share, that's when you call the peer. That's where you use that network. I have a case study that's near and dear to my heart. My brother-in-law sends me a text that says, what's going on at my facility? I can't use my office computer. It's not a company I work for. But I reach out to the lead at that facility and I say, is there anything I can help you with? You know, is there anything you need me to look for that you might be experiencing? That's the good old boy networking at work. Turned out it actually was one where they had to have significant incident response, and you know, he sent me a note right away. He goes, I'll get back to you. I was the first one to inform that other facility that he needed to know about an incident. He needed to take action. That's not the way the good old boy network should work. That's why it takes a community, and I implore you again, I challenge you, get engaged with that community.
It's a great question. Well done.
And from experience, I know that that good old boy network is very inclusive in the nuclear industry. It's Sandra is one that you know, and others that, everybody is in that network, and it's very, very willing to adopt people into it.
Let me ask another follow-up relative with what you just, you're great
You'll get to ask your
segue person.
question someday.
No. Well, hopefully these are questions. No. Well, it had to do with Mandy's case. To me, when I sit there listening, I made the comment they're quite different environments. Now, you guys in the power industry, nuclear is very closed. I mean, very unique. It's a very small group. Not small, but it's a very well-defined thing. Power, even though there's many utilities, is still a very well-defined thing, and we're talking about information sharing by end users about the problems they're having. Now, in your case, what I was going to ask you is to extend it. When she mentions, like, I know a lot about supply chain and things like that. And I don't mean software supply chain, I mean physical supply chain, shipping and things like that, and partners and distributors. Those are whole different networks that don't have that kind of a structure that I have the same kind of facility you do. Maybe you have so-and-so's equipment, I have so-and-so. This is a much more broader thing. I'm just curious, does the information sharing, I would think it would help, but again, maybe it's the networking. I'm just wondering, are you doing anything to try to build that kind of a networking where you can have a distributor that calls and says, hey, Mandy, I got this crazy email. Was that even something as simple as, I got this email from you telling me to download this package because so you can send me something. I mean, to me, that would be ideal. I don't want to give anybody an idea here. Whoops.
No, it's a really valid question, and I think that, it's on two fronts. From my perspective, one, understanding your industry and your business, right? We all do cyber, but we have to understand our business units, and that makes us good business partners. So what are those different pieces? And then understanding both regionally, globally, and from an industry perspective, who can I rely on those different sectors, right? Because you saw Kohler is immensely diversified, and I need to know people in different, oh, wait, there are new PCI regulations this year, and okay, that's great. What are you doing to make sure you meet that regulation? Or, oh, wait, distribution, we're really worried about manufacturer, not distribution, on my OT side on the plant floor, they say, I still don't have a patch from that manufacturer. What are you doing about it? So knowing each of those different sectors, because again, even though the process is the same, right, and we're trying to apply it as applicable for each of my different components, I have different trust networks for each of those, and you have to build those. So, I know we all care about security. We have to care about our business and understand the way they work. So, people first.
I don't know if anybody else wanted to comment on it, but I don't want, please, take your question. I'll take your question.
I got a question. I'm Chris with Schneider Electric. A lot of you are referencing some terminology that resonates with me that comes out of the U.S. military. And since all four of your firms are private firms, meaning non-federal firms, I wanted to see if you're involved with the Department of Defense at all with your cybersecurity measures. And when I'm not talking about DHS, but actual DoD, because you use different terms that come out of the military. Like I know Tom Fanning, he's part of a cybersecure DoD working group. And so I just wanted to see if your firms are engaged in that space. Thank you.
Yes, we participated in a cyber strike several times where we work with DoD and others. So we're basically bringing in, it's a red team exercise where their red team attacks an infrastructure and it's an exercise that's there. That's one example. There's a number of other ones that various utilities participate in. There's another outreach that goes on within parts of the DoD. This is at our neighboring utility down the street in Arizona. Their transmission and distribution lines cover Luke Air Force Base. And the Air Force bases realize what they need in order to maintain battle readiness, I think is the term they use. And one of the factors identified was electricity. So they actively work with the utility to make sure that they've got all the links that they need and procedures everywhere from, it starts at Black Start. There are Black Start plans for those sorts of eventualities. So.
And again, it goes back to versatility. Kohler doesn't necessarily do all of these things, but in my previous experience, we've worked with government agencies, and we've needed to understand some of those regs as well. When in my last position, we worked with the National Guard, and we actually were doing something, if the fault went off on the West Coast, how are we going to respond to that from an infrastructure and a security perspective, right? Availability. And so we work with different government agencies, working with the FBI, talking to them proactively. And I know that's not necessarily DOD, but just I think the greater question is the versatility around the way that we handle things. I think we just have to come back a layer of abstraction without, we all have everyday work we have to do, but if we back up 10 feet and we look across all of our verticals, all of our industries, whether it's government, whether it's DHS, whether it's DOD, any of those components, we have to be ready to respond. And I think a lot of our vernacular, when we start using NIST terminology or SANS, the CIS terminology, all those words start to resonate because we're all solving to the same principles, which are CIA. And it doesn't matter what order they're in. On the floor, it's AIC, but, depending on where you come from. So I think when we start to talk that way and we start to have those, I think any relationship you can build, any network, any trust you can build will make a lot of sense for your program as well, because you'll learn something. I don't do anything with nuclear, but I bet I can learn something, right? So.
Yeah, and the private-public partnership really is the model that if you're in the U.S., it's wonderful to follow, and a lot of that goes back to the national labs, which has a lot of roots at DoD partnerships, and DOE is what I'm under the umbrella of. But some of the exercises that Marc explained are certainly ones that maybe you don't have to be in the energy industry to get into. EarthX is one that covers an average resident of a community all the way up to the largest enterprises. So there's private and public partnerships that you really could and should get engaged with. FBI InfraGard is one for critical infrastructure. If you are able to get cleared to a little bit higher level and have no need to know, you can be in the Homeland Security Information Network, HSIN is in. Those are all avenues to stay in touch. And just to plug out to the DoD, the STIGs that they have for hardening guides are fantastic. There's great resources out there publicly available on how to secure your environment.
I'm going to add one more thing because you mentioned InfraGard. So for the FBI, I'm not kidding you. Be proactive, reach out to your local agency. They want to know who you are, and they want to know about your business and what your concerns are. And I have a direct line. I don't have to call a 1-800 number because I know my local branch, and they know who I am. And so if I have a question, I just call and say, I'm seeing this. Should I be worried? Is this specific to me? Is it bigger? And they're as open as they can be, and they really are helpful. So, another plug, another private, public.
I talked to our rep, Christine Figueroa at DHS,
once
to
a quarter.
prepare for this.
And,
Okay.
And the best thing is to establish those relationships before you need them at your door.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment about Dragos. For Dragos, it's pretty simple, right? Our tagline, our vision, our motto, safeguarding civilization. So it doesn't matter what government agency is out there, if we can relate the project to protecting civilians and their homes, right? Specific to a good use case is military bases. There are civilians that live on those bases, right? If we can associate those kinds of projects, Dragos is going to be there.
Okay, we got, I think, time for one more question. Go ahead, Mark. That's Mark Duck.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Duck with Shell, and so Mark and I were on a roundtable, and we kind of batted this around yesterday. But I'd like to get your views on. I'm fully on board with all this information sharing. It's necessary, and there's a lot of drivers that are driving us toward all this connectedness that's opening us up to some of these threats, right? But there's the Idaho National Laboratory. They've come up with this methodology called consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, and you said safeguarding. What did you say? Safeguarding civilization. So there's another element of this possibly about how do we engineer our critical infrastructure such that it's there's this term fail-safe out there. How do we engineer, or can we engineer our infrastructure so that it's cyber safe? Design out the risk to the extent we can. The rest of it we still have to manage with all the things you're talking about. But anyway, comments on that. And I've learned a lot just by becoming familiar with the safety engineering processes, HSSE processes, and how we can apply that on the cyber side. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of the efforts from the Idaho National Lab and the Cyber Corps in general, Pacific Northwest National Lab, Sandia National Lab, and the consequence-driven cyber engineering is build it in. Mandy discussed that. It's always best to build it in prior to bolting it on. And if you understand the consequences of that system being compromised, I'm not saying failing, I'm saying compromised. So we all plan around probabilistic risk assessment and failure mode effective analysis in true engineering world. But if you know what your consequences are and you can establish the criteria up front and how the system should be designed and configured, that reduces the attack surface. Overall, that's where you want to be.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention there from our professional service side, one of the things we just started doing was actually attending factory acceptance tests with our customers with new control systems, right? So engineers are coming with that mindset of, yep, everything's got to work. We have to be able to run the plant, and we have to have all those controls. At the same time, bring in that other level of, is it cyber safe, as you mentioned, right? Use the terminology. What are the other questions that weren't necessarily asked in that initial design? And I think it's helping move farther up the chain to design to go, let's go work with those vendors specifically before we're even talking about factory acceptance testing to go, where are we at? And I think we're starting to move there ourselves, and I'm seeing the rest of the other competitors try to do the same as well. Let's try and get closer to what you're mentioning about making sure that cybersecurity is designed inside of these systems before we get to, hey, here's your report, here are your problems.
And I think it's, it's a buzzy word, I'm going to use it, shifting left. And what I mean by that is we talk people, process, technology. From my perspective, if I just, again, I like to abstract things for myself. To get a good process, we can talk about technology all day, but if you're already at factory acceptance, right, do you have the right process built? And do you know what problem you're solving to? Because, I don't let my team choose a technology till they've defined the process and what they're trying to solve. So, in your particular space, there are very specific guidelines that we have to follow, and we have to build security in, but we have to understand what problem we're solving and what some of the risks are acceptable risks. We can decide as a business certain things we're willing to accept and some we're not. And the things that are non-negotiable have to be part of the process so that the technology and the configuration that we require of that technology are outlined early and often, not later in the game.
Okay, I think we've run out of time, so I didn't want to cut anybody off. So if there's more questions, I'm sure they'd love to talk to you after the panel. So anyhow, would you join me in thanking the panel and the speakers? Very, very good session. Thank you very much.